It started like any ordinary afternoon at the small-town police station. But what happened next would send shockwaves through the entire department. An elderly black man, quiet and soft-spoken, was walking home from the grocery store when he was suddenly stopped by two local police officers. They claimed he matched a description, the vague phrase so often used to justify wrongful stops. He explained calmly that he was a veteran, proudly served his country, and just wanted to get home. But the officers didn't listen. Within minutes, they had him in cuffs, pressed against the hood of their cruiser, while bystanders looked on in disbelief. What the officers didn't know, and what would change everything, was who this man really was. Beneath the old coat and calm demeanor was a decorated military intelligence veteran with powerful government ties. And within 30 minutes of his arrest, unmarked black SUVs rolled up to the station. Out stepped federal agents, wearing dark suits, flashing badges, and they weren't there to ask questions. They were there to take over. What happened inside that station after the FBI walked in remains mostly under wraps, but witnesses say the energy shifted immediately. The officers who made the arrest looked confused, even scared. Phones were taken, conversations went silent, and the man they had just arrested was quietly released without explanation. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest, it was a serious mistake with consequences far bigger than anyone in that department imagined. And it's raising big questions. Why did the FBI respond so quickly? What secrets was this veteran carrying? And what happens when the people meant to protect us make the wrong call, on the wrong person? Stay with me, because what happened after the FBI showed up is where this story really begins. The officers barely had time to process what was happening before the veteran was escorted out of the holding room, not by them, but by the federal agents. No handcuffs. No charges. Just a silent, intense walk past the front desk and out the door. Inside the station, tension hung heavy in the air. The local cops whispered among themselves, trying to figure out who this man really was and why federal agents showed up so fast, without any warning or paperwork shared in advance. People in the neighborhood started asking questions too. Some had seen the arrest happen. They knew the man as Mr. Harris, a quiet, respectful elder in the community. Always wore a clean cap, always carried his reusable shopping bag, always greeted folks with a smile. Most folks had no idea about his military past. But those who did knew it wasn't just any service. He worked in intelligence, held clearances most people have never even heard of, and after retiring, had kept a low profile. Still, it was clear to anyone paying attention, this man was connected. Back at the station, things started to get strange. One officer noticed the security cameras inside the holding area had stopped recording just minutes after the veteran was taken in. Another realized some case files had been locked down remotely, files no one had touched in years. And there were quiet conversations happening in the captain's office that no one was invited to join. Outside, neighbors were talking. Was this a cover-up? A warning? Or did they just arrest someone with far more power than they thought? The town had seen questionable policing before, but nothing like this. It was clear something bigger was happening behind the scenes, and the truth was going to be hard to come by. But the biggest surprise was still on its way. The next morning, the police station was quieter than usual. Officers showed up on time, but there was an unease in the air. No one knew what to say about what had happened the night before. Some tried to brush it off like it never happened, but others were clearly shaken. Especially the two officers who made the arrest. They were called into a closed-door meeting first thing, and when they came out, their faces were pale, their eyes darting around like they were being watched. Meanwhile, the town was buzzing. Social media posts were flying around, photos of the arrest, blurry shots of the black SUVs, even speculation that Mr. Harris was some kind of spy. A local reporter tried to ask the police for a statement, but they were told it was a federal matter. That just made people even more suspicious. Why would a small-town police department be told to stay quiet about an elderly man being wrongly arrested, unless something much bigger was being hidden? Mr. Harris hadn't been seen since. Some neighbors said they saw him leave in a black vehicle early that morning. Others swore they saw FBI agents still in the area, quietly speaking to residents, asking questions but offering no answers. A few people even mentioned noticing drones flying low over the neighborhood the night before. No one could prove it, but it felt like surveillance had kicked into a whole new level. At the center of all this was a growing divide. Some officers were starting to question the actions of their own department. Others doubled down, defending the arrest and blaming the veteran for not complying fast enough. The town's mayor stayed silent. And people who had always trusted law enforcement were now wondering if they were being protected or watched. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Someone inside the station had started leaking information. Anonymous tips were being sent to journalists. Details about the arrest. About Mr. Harris. About what really might have triggered that call to the FBI. And that's when things started to spiral. The leak changed everything. At first, it was just whispers, messages passed through encrypted emails and burner accounts. But soon, a few trusted reporters started connecting dots the town hadn't even known existed. It turned out Mr. Harris wasn't just a retired intelligence officer. He had once been part of a classified federal task force focused on domestic surveillance operations. Years ago, he'd quietly blown the whistle on unlawful monitoring practices targeting Black communities across the country. That report was buried. Until now. Suddenly, it made sense why the FBI showed up so fast. Mr. Harris wasn't just any civilian, he was a protected federal witness. His identity was supposed to be confidential. But somehow, his arrest triggered an alert that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. And now, the fact that his cover had been blown, by a routine stop in a quiet town, had people in Washington very nervous. Inside the police department, things were falling apart. The anonymous leak had named not only the arresting officers but also a pattern of racial profiling complaints filed over the past few years. Some of those complaints had mysteriously disappeared. Others had never been investigated at all. Internal affairs was suddenly involved. Officers were being interviewed. Phones and computers were quietly seized. The chief didn't show up for work. No one knew if he quit or had been told to stay away. But the real pressure was outside. Protesters started showing up in front of the station. Peaceful, but angry. Signs read "Justice for Harris" and "Protect our elders." People demanded answers. Meanwhile, the FBI hadn't issued a single public statement. That silence spoke louder than anything. Then, a strange message appeared in the inbox of the local news station. An audio file. Unmarked. No return address. When they played it, they heard what sounded like a conversation inside the station. The moment just before the veteran was taken into custody. What was said in that clip? Why was it sent now? And who was listening? The story was about to break wide open. The audio file shook the newsroom. In the recording, the voices of the arresting officers could be clearly heard, laughing and mocking Mr. Harris before he was even asked for identification. One officer said, "Old guy like that? Bet he's hiding something," while the other added, "They always got something to hide." The tone was cruel, careless, and now it was public. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, national hashtags began trending, and pressure on local officials exploded. But then, something unexpected happened. A second file was sent, this one video. It wasn't from a bystander or the police station's cameras. It was high resolution, angled perfectly from above, like it had been recorded from a drone. It showed the entire arrest, start to finish, including the exact moment the officers ignored Mr. Harris's ID, and the moment they searched his bag without a warrant. Even more alarming, the video revealed something no one expected, a third person watching from a distance, wearing plain clothes and holding what looked like a two-way radio. He never stepped in. He just watched and left once the arrest was made. That man hadn't been in any police reports. Within minutes, internet sleuths began identifying him, facial recognition, background checks, online digging. It turned out he wasn't a civilian. He had ties to a private defense contractor with a long history of quiet government work, particularly in intelligence and surveillance. And just like that, the story took a darker turn. Now the question wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. It was about surveillance, silencing, and the possibility that Mr. Harris wasn't randomly targeted, but was being watched for a reason. Why had someone from a government-linked agency been nearby during the arrest? Was it a coincidence, or part of something much bigger? The town thought it was dealing with a local mistake. But now, it looked like they had stepped straight into the middle of something national. Something that had been hidden for a long time, and was about to come crashing into the light. The day the video was confirmed real, everything reached a boiling point. The town was swarmed with news crews, civil rights lawyers arrived, and federal investigators stepped in to take over the case. The mayor finally made a public statement, but it was too late. Trust had already crumbled. The police department's front windows were boarded up, not from protests, but from fear of what might come next. Then came the real shock. Mr. Harris returned. Not with reporters or security, but quietly, to the community center. He stood in front of a crowd of neighbors, calm and steady as ever, and told them the truth. He had been part of an internal federal audit group, retired, yes, but still active under special clearance. His mission was to monitor potential civil rights violations in local law enforcement. What happened to him wasn't just an accident. It was a trigger, a test the system failed. He never expected to be arrested. But once it happened, the alert system he carried, a device hidden in his wallet, notified federal authorities in real time. That's why the FBI responded so quickly. The man in the video with the radio? He wasn't a threat. He was Mr. Harris's assigned field contact, tasked with observing from a distance. He had no authority to intervene, only to watch and report. But then Mr. Harris paused. His tone shifted. He said the true danger wasn't the arrest. It was what came after. In the weeks following the incident, Mr. Harris revealed that multiple people involved in covering up past profiling cases, both in the station and beyond, had already resigned or disappeared from public view. Internal investigations were now rolling out in other towns across the state, triggered by what happened here. His arrest had pulled a thread that was now unraveling a much larger network. Just when the crowd thought the story was over, Mr. Harris ended with one final twist. He looked out and said, "They thought they were watching me. But the whole time, I was watching them." And with that, he stepped off the stage. In the days after Mr. Harris's speech, things in the town slowly began to change. The officers involved in the arrest were placed on indefinite leave, pending federal review. One quietly resigned. Another lawyered up. The police department, once known for ignoring complaints, was now under a microscope, not just from the feds, but from the people it was supposed to serve. Community leaders began organizing regular town halls. For the first time in years, residents felt like their voices were being heard. Mr. Harris stayed in town for a while, helping guide discussions and answering questions from neighbors who finally saw him not just as a veteran, but as someone who had quietly protected them in a much bigger way. His presence reminded people that not all heroes wear uniforms or speak loudly. Some just observe, gather truth, and strike when the moment is right. The FBI never released a full statement, but behind the scenes, multiple state agencies launched reforms based on evidence uncovered during the investigation. The video leaks, the audio recordings, even the silent field contact in the background, all pointed to a need for transparency in both local law enforcement and the systems that watch them. What started as a wrongful arrest had become the spark for statewide accountability. As for the man who set it all in motion, Mr. Harris eventually left town again. No fanfare, no interviews. Just a quiet goodbye to a few neighbors and a simple message: keep watching. Keep asking questions. That's how change sticks. The story of the elderly black veteran, the racist arrest, and the FBI's unexpected arrival became more than just a viral headline. It became a reminder that even in the shadows of injustice, truth has a way of surfacing. And when it does, it can change everything. The crowd inside the community center stood silent as Mr. Harris stepped down. It wasn't just about what he'd said, it was the way he said it. Calm. Precise. With no anger, no need to shout. Just facts. That final line, "I was watching them," echoed in people's minds as if they had witnessed the ending of a movie, only this was real life. Folks began to realize they weren't just listening to a victim, they were hearing from someone who had been protecting them long before they ever knew they needed it. Over the next few days, things changed fast. The police officers involved in Mr. Harris's arrest were placed on unpaid leave while the Department of Justice reviewed the case. Civil rights organizations from across the country came to the small town, offering legal support, mental health services, and resources for community reform. It felt like a long overdue shift was finally taking place. Local leaders who had stayed quiet before were now speaking out. Town hall meetings, once half empty, were packed. People brought questions, stories, and sometimes just pain they had carried for too long. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was honest. The community had found its voice. And Mr. Harris? He didn't vanish into the background. He stayed present, not as a symbol, but as a man dedicated to doing the work. He began meeting with students at local schools, holding quiet talks about service, history, and how to lead without shouting. He helped establish a civilian review board to oversee local police complaints and offer accountability. He wasn't leading protests. He was building something that could last beyond headlines. One day, a high school student named Mia, who had quietly recorded the original police encounter from across the street, finally stepped forward. Her video hadn't gone viral, but it had served as backup when the first audio and drone footage were questioned. She'd been scared to speak up, afraid of backlash, but Mr. Harris personally thanked her. Courage, he told her, doesn't always feel big. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it shakes. But it still shows up.